Janet Gothelf, and for those of you that don't know me, my background is in psychotherapy, and for many years ago I got involved in counselling the families of people across the entire autism spectrum of different ages, and that would be mothers, fathers, sisters, husbands, all sorts of people. And one of the things that I think shocked me then, continues to shock me actually, was that there was seriously very little or no provision for adults with Asperger's syndrome and high functioning autism. The story is not very different today, really, and this is many years later. And I found myself years ago, about 15 years ago, becoming involved in facilitating groups for adults with Asperger's syndrome and high functioning autism, and individually working with those people. And that made it reinforced to me that there is just very little out there. And fortunately, because of the autism law coming into place last year and the will behind people in Harrow and various other boroughs, this is beginning to change. But particularly, I wanted to thank Bernard Hart, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, who was the inspiration originally, who foresaw an idea, a really grandiose trajectory of a centre of excellence in Harrow, and it's got to start somewhere, and it started in this centre. And Elizabeth, who's not hearing what I'm saying, but Elizabeth, who kindly took over the baton, because if Elizabeth hadn't have done that, it would have just sank into nothing. So I really appreciate that, and also appreciate all the volunteers that are involved, because I'm going to share with you a little bit about the specific projects that I particularly am involved in. As you've heard from Elizabeth, there's a whole list of things that they're involved trying to do. And one of the other points I wanted to make is that it's cutting edge stuff that we're doing here, because people actually have spent a lot of time researching, millions and billions of pounds on researching biomarkers and brain sizes and diagnosis, all that type of aspect of autism, but very little has gone into figuring out what helps best people with Asperger's syndrome and autism. And so what we're doing in places like the centre here is figuring out that together with people with Asperger's syndrome, what helps best. So I want to share with you the 4 particular projects that I've specifically been involved in, because I know more about those because I've been involved with them. But whenever I have an opportunity to speak to an audience about autism, I always invariably, I don't need both those words, do I? Invariably will say something which I think is always important and can never be said often enough, which is when you've met one person with Asperger's syndrome, you've met that particular person with Asperger's syndrome. And when you meet another person with Asperger's syndrome, you've met that particular person with Asperger's syndrome. And really what that conveys, hopefully to you all, is that it's a very varied group of people. And, you know, the condition itself, the diagnosis, is the same for all those people, but the way that those difficulties in social and communication disorder, that's what it's often called, I prefer the word social and communication difference because I see it in those terms, those differences in flexible, the way they process information, comes out so differently in each and every one of you. And anybody that's worked in the field and people themselves that with this condition know that they're very different from each other. Now that's a huge challenge for any service setting itself up, because how do you meet these varied needs? And I want to share with you these 4 projects because I hope to some way to show that you can meet many people's needs in different ways, and you do have to have different offerings. The 2 things that needed to be in place, and I think the centre has tried very hard to achieve this, are firstly, you need to make the place feel safe, secure, and that means maybe some sensory issues that individuals have must be addressed. There may be a lot of different particular things that need to be in place to make people feel safe and secure. It also has to be relevant to them. That is also a very key feature. And another important aspect is they have to feel respected, because I think all individuals who feel the need and have to be and respected, and that means that sometimes people put on projects for people and they're too patronising, or they don't really respect them in the way that they need to be respected, because it is about difference and not necessarily disability. And so those things are all in place for all the projects. And the first project is one that started at the inception of this, when we had some funding for this project. And what it was is that it needed to be, as well as safe and secure, it needed to be real. And by that, I mean it needs to happen in real time. I think most people, and particularly, I really feel strongly about this, particularly adults with Asperger's syndrome, really need to learn real time, in real situations. You know, role play and things has its place, but it doesn't actually work so effectively to my mind and from my practice, as well as things when it happens in real life. So the first project was to invite a variety of different speakers to come in to speak. So varied, you know, there'd be somebody, you know, relevant things like about employment, so their CV writer would come in, or somebody would come in and talk about nutrition. And because the environment felt safe and secure and they felt comfortable, they were able, as a group, to come to something that is sometimes quite challenging to be socially in with strangers that you've never met before, to make it secure enough to enable them to listen to that talk. But by being social and communicating effectively and having a facilitator, in this case myself, to help with that process. So if there was a misunderstanding between people, between the person giving the talk and it could be facilitated and enhanced, and they could use that real time, whatever happens. And I'll try and give you an example of it. So for instance, this lady came in and did some drumming, which is like a type of communication device. And the drumming, a lot of people were not that interested in doing it, but then when they did it, they really enjoyed it, so that was good. But I noticed that one guy who'd come in and he was really nervous and didn't look at anybody, and he sat there. Normally, typically, a teacher would try and encourage them, but because I've worked in this field for a long time, I knew that that was not appropriate. So later on, when everybody went in for coffee and the drum was just there, I noticed this guy went over and started to play. And the teacher, who had no experience of Asperger's, wanted to rush over and work with him. But I encouraged her to stay alone. So do you know what I mean? It facilitates the right learning place for people to have the experience. The guy could do it on his own. Another better example, I think, is a lovely lady came in to talk about fitness. And we had a nice talk, it was over, and one of our guys went up to her at the end and said, can I have a hug? Right. Well, I read body language quite well, he does not. And he found that quite difficult to interpret that sort of communication. So what she said to him, what do you think she said? She's a nice lady. She said, yes. So he goes away, probably with a rule that he'd already established: if I ever want physical contact with somebody, the best thing is to ask if it's okay. The woman said yes. So the hug took place. But then because the facilitator, myself, went in there, I was able real time to explain to this individual at the appropriate level for him, to explain that this was unexpected, and I could ask that person and say, you know, this was an unexpected. She didn't, and I said, did you expect her to do that? She said no. Did you feel awkward? Yes. She said yes. She'd never have said that because she's a nice lady. And this person then would go around thinking that this was appropriate to do to a total stranger that he'd only listened to talk for half an hour to go up and ask for a hug. Now, it's not wrong to do those things. It really isn't. I'm not trying to say that, but this individual with Asperger's syndrome didn't have the choice to know that this was perhaps something that we're generally perceived as something different. So it enables real things to learn. That also informs us as an organisation about what's best to teach people. What is it they want to know about? Well, relationships is way up there as one of the most important things that people with Asperger's syndrome want to learn about. So the most current project that I'm involved in, once a month I come in and we do something called, it's roughly called social understanding. It enables people to reflect on and think about, how do we know things like whether somebody is a stranger, an acquaintance, a friend. How do you make those judgments where somebody becomes an acquaintance and then now they're your friend? It's really difficult to figure those things out. Neurotypical people, those are people that are not on the autistic spectrum or other diversities, they sort of figure it out by sort of knowing it. I mean, it's really hard, but what we have to do here as a centre is come up with good strategies and plans and material for people to figure it out. So what we did, just to remind myself, is we decided to define what a relationship was. And instead of a rule like this guy had had before, which is if I want to touch somebody, I should ask them first and wait and see the yes, which isn't going to work in a lot of settings, we came up with something which was much more effective. It was like to give points, and I won't make this very clear because I'm going to try to explain something which took me about half an hour to explain in about 2 minutes. You've got like 4 points for how much the person, you rely on the person. You've got another potential 4 points or maximum 4 points for how much you had a common interest with the person, and maybe another up to 4 points of how much you liked that person, and then there were other things anyway. So you could get a maximum. I don't know if this is very clear to you, but anyway, you can always ask me if you're motivated or interested enough to find out. You could get a maximum of 16 points, and that was a much better way for those. Some people found this really, really useful. I'm trying to explain to you why these things are useful to people with Asperger's syndrome, and they found it really useful because it was something concrete you could go and apply. And there was a couple that came here. I've asked their permission to talk about it, and the wife says, you're inappropriate with the neighbours, you're far too friendly. So we could use this mechanism, so we did. It's real, you see, it applies really to his life and the neighbour. And he totted up, and I think he got something like 6 or 7 out of a potential 16. So he was able then to translate that information. I think actually his behaviour was too friendly, perhaps, for that particular person because they only got them. Fortunately, when he did tot up a bit, his wife, he did get a high score. I think it was about 18 or 14 out of 16. That was very helpful. But it also taught the people that were involved in this that that's what intimacy is about. You develop. It's not just simply. Often for people with Asperger's, it's more about how they feel. If they like you, then they think you're close, and that can often lead to difficult relationships and potentially behaviours like stalking. I'm not suggesting everybody with Asperger's syndrome is in that category, but for some individuals they've got no measure of how to sort that out. And then I will stop talking, but I'll just talk very briefly about 2 other projects as well. I wanted to explain to you that sometimes quality is more important than quantity. So it's quite a small group of about 6, maybe 7 maximum, that meets every month. And we do 2 very different things, alternate months. The first month, we meet in a very small group, in a therapy group it really is, and they can discuss really complicated, personal problems about understanding their Asperger's syndrome and difficulties they have with each other, with other people, and we can really spend a couple of hours seriously addressing some very, very challenging things. And we've done some challenging in personal hygiene, difficult relationships between people, with events that have happened outside the group that they feel able to talk about because it's small and it's structured, and they feel that thing again very, very safe. And it's very real to them because it's about their real lives. It's not made up stories, it's about what's happening for them. And that's why that works very effectively. Alternate months, we do something quite different, which is grow up socially. The group decide where we go, and we've been to museums, and some people don't feel secure enough to go on their own to town on a tube, but they meet together with Nick and myself, and we usually start at Harrow, and we go into, and we've been to Cheney's Manor. Last month we went to the Doll's House tea rooms in Harrow on the Hill, which is very nice if anybody hasn't been there. We had a nice cup of tea. It was raining, so we didn't walk around the hill. And then, then Nick and myself will stay a couple of hours, then we go. Many people will stay on. It's not like, they're free to come and go and meet us there. It's not like, I don't really know how to describe it really. Sorry?
Not like a school outing.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not like a school outing. It's a group of people coming together, making themselves feel as though they're going with friends and secure to do that. So that's a project that's also very valuable that I'm involved in. And finally, one that's now under the schedule, there's a book, is a club that I've been running for a couple of years, which is phenomenal. And this is to elicit the idea for everybody here that not all things fit for all people, because they're all individuals. It's a book club. And that's not for everybody, but for the people it is for, it really, really works very, very well. because again, what we're doing is just sharing this activity of reading the book. We've read the same book, and we've read a variety of books, from a book written in the 1400s, The Prince by Machiavelli. We've read a teenage vampire novel, a love story, you know, so that the literature is interesting for the individuals to be involved in, because you're reading things that you wouldn't otherwise read, and that includes myself reading them. And the difference between neurotypical and Asperger's really comes out in this. And the book that we read on Monday, that we discussed on Monday, this Monday just gone, was a book written in 1966. It was about two young Jewish Orthodox boys brought up and growing up in the 1940s, during the war and just after the war. And it was quite a beautiful book, actually. And like one of our members said, that it was in her top 3 books. She would never have picked it up, it's not her style of book. But she felt as though she got so much from it that we were able to discuss things about not belonging, sense of identity, sense of growth, dealing with one's parents, issues of how you learn through silence. And one of the most interesting things we had a discussion is that silence is often the way that a lot of people with Asperger's actually learn. So we're learning a lot about each other, which is very beneficial. And to end with, I wanted to sort of, I hope I have conveyed to you the breadth of what is on offer and how invaluable this is for people. I mean, I would say that because I'm involved, you might think, but I actually have had such positive feedback individually from various people. And I was thinking, you know, I wonder how I could get that across, and like some sort of sense of fate. Quite a number of people who do come here would not feel able, because it is a social and communication difficulty, to come to something like this, to show their support. So one member wants to send something anonymously, so just let me get hopefully my email will come up and I will be able to read to you. She sent it me about an hour ago, and I thought, gosh, she wanted to share this in the group, so I am going to anonymously. She says, hi Janet, that's me. She says, please can you anonymously pass this information on today at the open ceremony if you feel it will enlighten the centre. And I think that she says it really beautifully. As the centre means to me, my inner soul was used to feeling sad and lonely, never knowing anything different. All lonely souls began to feel connected by Ask the Centre. Magic, not intended, became magical. Sparks of life, compassion and understanding became a ball of radiant light. Together we glowed, still able to shine individually. The Ask the Centre is a magic to lost souls. Thank you. Isn't that lovely? Yeah.